pretty cool. All right, so Martin gave you a pretty quick intro. I usually talk about rapid prototyping. It's a thing that I've been doing for a good long time, maybe about 15 years or more, starting out way back in the day with software, but moving it into organizational, operational design, design of space, the movement through space, all sorts of crazy stuff. The hardware at Google X, and then afterwards, things like working on improving things in the world for the 2 billion people living on less than $2 a day, entrepreneurship broadly, corporate structures, and a lot of other crazy stuff. But a thread that runs through all of these things is, in these processes, I can continue to learn things. A lot of these lessons I learned from rapid prototyping were very directly applicable to the discipline of product management. So what does it look like when you do stuff like that? Well, I did and shipped a ridiculous amount of stuff. This was like weirdly cathartic, putting a bunch of stuff together, because I was like, that's my whole life, holy crap. But luckily I made it small enough so nobody will ask any questions about anything in particular. But you got some self-driving cars, you got some balloons to give internet to all of the world, you have Google Glass, you have Yahoo Answers, you got Microsoft Outlook, sorry. And and you've got some really interesting stuff. I'm actually reasonably excited about some of this work in the developing world. So there's Guatemala and Liberia, and working on a new type of micro-pasteurizer in India, and so on and so forth. So lots of cool stuff that rapid prototyping has taught me about the world and about product management. So I'm going to share a couple of those lessons about product management with you guys today. And this is the slide that means nothing, because you're going to hear all these things in greater detail right after this. But it's going to be about creating a culture of learning, staying in the medium, and optimizing loop length. And these all sound super weird, but they'll sound super normal very soon. Now, what does it mean to create a culture of learning? Well, as mentioned in the intro, I've traveled all around the world, taught workshops, worked with teams, been an investor, advisor, mentor to over 100 entrepreneurs at this point, as well as having shipped a lot of the stuff that you saw before. And a lot of times I found that it's not really about telling them what to do. Like, the outside game of knowing some new techniques of what to do is only a little bit of the problem. The deeper problem of most of these organizations is what I call the inside game. And at the heart of them, they have a culture that makes it really difficult to be good at creating products and product management broadly. And I would define this culture as the culture of right and wrong. And in fact, this doesn't even have a name, really, because for the most part, the culture of right and wrong is the entire culture that we live in. So in order to understand the culture of learning, let me give you a quick debrief on what the culture of right and wrong looks like. Culture of right and wrong looks like this. Let's say you are a product person or a designer, engineer, executive, whoever inside of a business that does something right. Well, once you've done something right, well, you get the bonus, you get the promotion, you get more responsibilities, and you gain confidence in yourself, and the organization gains confidence in you. And when you do something wrong, then all the opposite things happen. You lose the promotion, people give you fewer responsibilities, you have less confidence in yourself, and people have less confidence in you. Now, in a way, this sounds weird to explain this, because this doesn't really just sound like product management. It's like the entire world we live in works like this. But this is what the culture of right and wrong looks like. Now, what does the culture of learning look like in comparison? Now, let's say you are one of those people, again, that has done something really right. But when you came back from doing this thing really right, that worked really well, that the customers loved and all that sort of thing, I ask you as the leader, I'm like, great, this thing went really well, last release really went well, what did you learn? And maybe you only give me one learning. I'm like, okay, that's crazy. You can't possibly have done so many things that worked well and only gotten one learning from that thing. Now, similarly, somebody might go away and they might do something which is a miserable failure, like the release lost us 20% of our users, and 15 people quit and whatever, right? But you might come back from all of that, and I ask you, well, what did you learn? If you come back to me with well, here's 15 really substantive things that I learned, and here's some things that we need to be looking out for, not be doing again, so on and so forth. In a culture of learning, something like that is highly praised. And in fact, in the culture of learning, the person who comes back with the really successful thing with only one learning, that's when you're like, come on, one learning? Just go back and go a little deeper, like see if you can find some more. Now, that's kind of a little snapshot of what it looks like in practice, but why is this important? Well, something that's hidden inside of a culture of right and wrong is that a culture of right and wrong is intrinsically diminishing. And what do I mean by that? So let's say there's 5 people in the meeting, and there's 2 people that have different proposals that disagree with each other. And like, I'm over here arguing proposal A, and you're over here arguing proposal B. And at the end of the day, one of these proposals is going to go through. This is what the culture of right and wrong encourages. Now, now clearly, if let's say my proposal doesn't go through, well, clearly my proposal has been diminished. But actually, even the person who won the argument, and their proposal went through, they're also diminished because they know for a fact that their entire team does not agree with them anymore. Right? So like, this is the world that we live in, and we actually are constantly diminishing ourselves through this practice of right and wrong. Now, in a culture of learning, so right and wrong is diminishing. In a culture of learning, things are additive. Because going back to that person that went and did the successful thing, if they did a successful thing and came back with 15 learnings, and somebody did a failed thing and came back with 17 learnings, well, typically these learnings are additive, right? Now you have like, 32 things that you know how to do right. So learning, a culture of learning is a very additive culture. A culture of right and wrong is a diminishing or subtractive culture. And when you multiply this by all the different interactions that will happen in a workplace every single day, you will see why this can kind of destroy you. Now, this is great. So people usually reference my Google X work, so I have to use some Google X examples. But I will speak to what John Coco said, because he's actually, we used to work together in Austin, so an awesome dude. So what does it look like when you start to move to a culture of learning? Well, one example is in Google Glass, we built 150 hardware prototypes in 10 weeks for less than $20,000 with 3 people. So like, clearly there's something that we were doing that was different. And it was that, number one, we didn't spend a lot of arguing time, like just debating and arguing and trying to prove each other wrong about what to do before we did anything. We'd just be like, well, let's get on to doing it. The only discussion would happen afterwards by pulling out key learnings. And key learnings can only come from an observed, embodied experience. So instead of debating about what it will be like in order to go, I'll give you a good example of one. So one of the things that I hacked up one afternoon was, you guys know those like little laser projected keyboards you can get from Brookstone? Projects on a thing, and you type like this, and it does Bluetooth and the thing. So I took one of these things because Google Glass didn't have a keyboard, or it'd be weird to have a keyboard on it. So I was like, well, what if it had like a little laser projector on it, and then that could like project on any surface, and you could walk up to a desk and type, and you could walk up to a wall and type, and that would put stuff in the glass, and that would be amazing, right? So I spent like an afternoon hooking that up together. Basically bought one and hacked it apart and added to glasses and kind of worked it up so that you could type with it. And at the end of that, maybe 4-hour prototyping exercise, I was like, this is freaking amazing. I was walking up the tables and walking up the walls, and I was like, this is huge. And then I like called over some people from the office. I was like, guys, you gotta check this out. You gotta check this out. They all walked over and they're like, yo, what's up? What's up? And, I was like, okay. So, I'm typing here, and it's like, well, you guys can't see what's happening in my eye, but I'm like typing right now. You can't see. And it's like, you can't see what's happening in my eye, and I'm typing right now. I mean, they could see the laser projected keyboard, so they knew that I wasn't crazy. But after typing a little bit, I was like, guys, isn't that amazing? And like, all 3 people were like, ah! Because if you think about it for a second, when you have lasers projecting out of your head, and you look at your friends, lasers go in their eyes. Now, like, you could have thought this through and debated this in a meeting for a long time, and it would have sounded like a freaking amazing idea. Like, it would make a beautiful looking movie, right? But when you actually embodied this experience, my key learning for the day is, you have this, you're going to shoot lasers in your friend's eyes. And then you could, I tried to work around it. I was like, well, what if it's a camera, and then we'd do face detection, and when the face is in the scene, and it's like, nah, it's too crazy. That's way too much work to be able to type. So that's what a key learning looks like. A key learning is not like we debated hard enough, or I looked it up on Wikipedia, or according to Mary Meeker's latest study. And I'm not saying that those aren't, Wikipedia or Mary Meeker are not good sources of information. They absolutely are. but they do not provide key learnings for what your product experience is in the world, right? So don't rely on debating right and wrong. Move into to creating key learnings and using those key learnings to make a path forward. And this is also essential for product managers, because if product managers can't measure something like, you know, the right and wrong of decisions onto a release, what can they measure? Well, they can absolutely measure how many key learnings are you generating as an organization every single week. And in Google X, like for the Google Glass, you know, we did 15 hardware prototypes per week for 10 weeks. Each one of those hardware prototypes typically generated 2 to 5 key learnings. By the end of 10 weeks, we just had, you know, hundreds and hundreds of key learnings that helped us define what the first version of the product became. Now, this is an important thing to go avoid. So actually, it's weird that people mention my Google experiences too, because like the thing that actually probably qualifies me to be on stage here is that I was a product management executive running product user experience and analytics at a multi-billion-dollar organization operating in 44 countries. And that sounds kind of impressive, except for my entire day was meetings. And like, you know, meetings with Europe in the morning, meetings with California in all day, meetings with Asia in the evening. It's a freaking disaster. And I created a new unit of measure, which is called meetings per linear foot. Because not only would I have all these meetings lined up, when I was walking between meetings, like 2 people would walk up and be like, Tom, I just gotta get 3 minutes. Like, holy crap. And like by the time I would get to like grab my pizza from the food court and back up, I had like 4 more meetings, you know, just on my lunch break to go between meetings. So when I got to Google, I was like super relieved, because I was like, I'm never gonna book out my calendar like that again. That's ridiculous. I'm gonna open it up so I have at least like 30, 40% of my time to make stuff, and there's never gonna be any of this like bullshit politics meetings again. And then I got into my first meeting on the first day. And in the first meeting on the first day, there were some interesting characters there. For example, these guys, and as well as some really smart PhDs, and just like folks I admired that had done artificial intelligence or robotics or whatever work. And in like 15 minutes, I was like, this is just as bad as my last organization, right? Like I call these situations a guess-a-thon, because all these people are, so it started out like really actually kind of inspirational. Like the actual brief for Google Glass was not like make a computer in your face. The actual brief for Google Glass was imagine as soon as you wanted to know something, you would just know it. I was like, okay, well, make something that allows that to be true. So like, you know, we were in the process of like brainstorming this thing, and that was like pretty good for 15 minutes. But we spent almost half of that 90-minute first meeting on that first day arguing what color the heads-up display should be. And like at the end of the day, the normal thing that happens in almost all these meetings happens. The people that win this argument are either the people that are best at arguing in the room or the people that have the highest title in the room. And in this case, it was the same person. It was Sergey Brin. And he basically said, guys, the color has just got to be red, has to be red. And he was like, because red photons are the least energetic, they'll be the least strain on the eye. That's true, physics-wise. And then the other great reason he had was, plus, it's always red in science fiction. So I was like not super satisfied with that answer. And I was like, I moved from one like very slow corporate environment, like being an executive with lots of meetings and politics, to a new environment which didn't have quite as many politics, but had just as many guess-a-thons. This is what I call these types of meetings. No one's had the direct experience. They're all guessing at each other about like what the future is going to have to be. And actually, I'll pose this question to you very quickly, because I think this will undo every meeting that you have had probably in the last month. Is like, what is the truth of the invention that has not been invented yet? It's like a completely absurd thought. And in fact, like this is what we're trying to prove to each other through guess-a-thons all the time. Well, I'm pretty certain that when we expand to this market, blah, blah, blah will happen. I'm pretty certain that when this feature is added, people are going to like this. That is us arguing the truth of the uninvented invention, right? Like we are literally operating on an absurd concept, hoping that like the law of averages may defeat absurdity, but it does not. Now, what actually happened that day is I built this thing, which allowed them to experience a heads-up display. And in that heads-up display, we projected a paragraph of text in every color in the rainbow that you could try and cycle through. And we found out, like everybody, so remember, argued, some of the smartest people that I know were all in a room arguing about this for during a 90-minute meeting. And within like 45 seconds or a minute of actually putting this thing on, walking around and trying out different colors, we had to agree red was the absolute worst possible color for heads-up display. And it wasn't even like close, like red was like the worst by a lot. And then purple was like second worst, but still a lot better. And then white, light blue, and yellow were good. Now, there's like, what argument could you possibly have had that would have led to those conclusions? How could you possibly know that outside of an embodied experience? Like, despite all the PhDs, despite all the successful entrepreneurs, despite all the brilliant people in that room, like, we were just going about it in a fundamentally absurd way. Now, as soon as like rational people approach something in a non-absurd way, we figured it out in 45 seconds. So that's one of the key things. Like, whenever you are in a meeting, ask yourself, is this becoming a guessathon? Are we basing things off of actual embodied experience, or are we basing things off of guesses? Or sometimes I call them conjectures because it's nicer than saying, hey, you're just guessing. It sounds like a little more scientific, then people like feel better. So the mantra of this entire thing, though, is that conjectures become experiments. There's nothing wrong with conjectures. They're like a well of creativity that allow you to know what to try next. And then only actual observed embodied experience, that's what you use to make decisions. Because I could have made conjectures all day about a laser projected keyboard, but the actual is I like partially blinded my friends. And actually, to John Kokel's point, we had a bunch of actuals about what Google Glass is good for. So if you are a surgeon, an anesthesiologist, a factory worker, a technician, it's amazing for you. Because imagine you're an anesthesiologist. What anesthesiologists do right now is they have an injection site where they're applying the anesthetic. Then they have a bank of machines behind them, typically, which has all your vital signs on it. So they're constantly doing this. Just watch a video of them. They're not looking at you while they're injecting stuff, then they're looking at that. Then they're looking at you, then they're looking at that. Now, what's way better is in your glass, there's your vitals, right? That works a lot better. If you're a technician, that's a lot better. A lot of things, like we had actuals where this just works better. Now, there was an executive, not to be named, who had the conjecture where it's like, well, despite all those actuals, I think what glass is good for is all the people, especially skydivers and mountain bikers and whatever. And I was like, well, we don't have a lot of actuals about that. I mean, it was kind of cool to like watch somebody else's feed, but I don't know. Anyway, so it went to market the way it went to market, but not necessarily because we knew it's okay. We'll just keep going. So lesson number 2 is to stay in the medium. And so my wife is a painter. This is an oil painting that she did of the Marin Headlands. And when you think about what a painter does, so an oil painter, their medium is oil paint. This is pretty obvious, I guess. But what it looks like for a painter to be in their medium is that their hands are in it, they're touching it, everything that they do, mixing it up, like getting it on the brush the right way, applying it, scraping it off with a palette knife. They're constantly in the medium. That's how great work gets done. But imagine for a second that you were a painter, but every single time that you wanted to go do a brush stroke, instead of like dabbing something on mixing a palette, dabbing it, and then applying something to the canvas, the following thing happened instead. You had to stop, you had to write a slide deck, take it to a meeting, communicate to enough people to get the shareholders on board, take that, formalize it in a specification, then take that over to some dev managers who argue down and decide to build 40% of it. Then, that 40% is okay done, then the QA team's like, oh, it's not acceptable. And then you go back and you start doing a little bit more of that. And after all that's done for a couple months, then you get to do your brush stroke. Now think about how hard it's going to be to make a masterpiece if you've decided that that's the way you're going to paint. And the issue here is not that there's anything wrong with any of those disciplines or those people. These are like great people. Like I've been a lot of those disciplines. I think that like people are honestly trying to go do the right thing. But like as a practical matter, you're spending a very little amount of time in the medium. Right? You're spending a very small amount of time in oil paint. You're spending most of your time in spec reviews and triage and all that sort of thing. Looks something like that, very different than what you imagine a painter to do. Now, I called it the Bermuda Triangle of ideas. You can see I have some biases about this work. But so all sorts of terrible things can happen. Now, so you need to go ask yourself some really fundamental questions. What is ultimately the medium of what you do? Like if staying in the medium enables you dramatically to like see more of what's happening, be more active in what's happening, and bring forward a masterpiece. And when I say you, I mean your entire team together. Then you have to ask, what is the medium of you and your team? And I would say that anybody who actually builds stuff, so designers and engineers, so here's the fallacy. So an engineer might think, well, my medium is like this programming language or lines of code or what have you. A designer might think, well, my medium is kind of like color and form and line and visual hierarchy and interaction flow and whatever. But I think that's all wrong. Like everybody who builds product, their medium is real human behavior in the real world. That is what your medium is. And if you are far away from that, you're spending all your time like obsessing about type, or you're spending all your time making like 4 layers of abstraction for something that users would never do, then you are completely out of the medium, right? So everybody who is a builder, your medium is to go and is human behavior in the real world, and your purpose should be to be in that medium, see real human behavior modified by what you do in the real world all the freaking time. Now, product managers have a really unusual medium because most of the time you're not writing the code or sketching up the designs. And I think the medium of product management is uncertainty. Because if you think about the medium of an oil painter, they're covered in oil paint by the end, right? And if you're a product manager, you're covered in uncertainty all the freaking time. Whenever there's uncertainty, it's like, I think that's where I'll go. Well, then I'll go over to here, and I'll get some uncertainty on me over here, right? And like, But hopefully, through the process of wrangling uncertainty, something beautiful comes out. Just like through the process of getting oil paint all over you, something beautiful comes out in the painting that happens, right? So just think for a moment, are you in the medium that you are meant to be in? Are the people that are building the product in the medium that they could be in? All right, third lesson, optimizing the loop length. So the loop length is basically the amount of time between somebody asserting a conjecture and then being able to observe the actuals from that conjecture. And for most folks, it is a process like what I mentioned before about the medium, which is people come up with an idea. The ideas are debated endlessly and pitched at each other. Eventually, somebody, through some kind of process, an idea is selected, and then it goes to a build cycle, which then takes its own time, and so on and so forth. And when you have something like that, your loop length, your amount of time to go try out one new conjecture might be, 3 months. Now, if you're using Agile or Scrum or whatever, maybe you're getting down to a week between releases. Maybe you're doing continuous integration, and you think that that's the same thing as having a short loop length, but it's not. Because the loop length is, if you're continuously integrating and making a new build every day, but you're not observing any actuals from customers from that build, your loop's not closed yet, right? So you can continuously integrate all freaking day, but then you only test with users once every 3 months. Your loop length is 3 months, right? So now, once again, this is another number or metric that product managers can really pay a lot of attention to and focus on reducing. And what might it look like to go work with loop length? So here's a schedule for a number of the teams that I currently run. And all the blue stuff is time when we actually get to do work. So that's pretty good. There's only 2 required meetings. One is a team sync on Monday to actually talk about what we're going to do for the week. And the other thing is it's kind of required, but if you don't have any of it, that's totally fine. But on Friday morning, there's a reflection and gratitude meeting, which is required. But if you have no gratitude, you can skip the meeting. I don't know, it happens. Now, the other really important feature of this calendar is every Tuesday and Thursday, we're in front of customers. Because it means that our loop length, effectively becomes 2 days long at the longest, right? There's never a loop length that is longer than 2 days long. And in fact, we have micro loops within the customer day, because we will go to a place and do code changes live. We'll see a tranche of 3 customers, and we'll do code changes, so the next 3 will go get better results, and the next 3 will get better results. It's kind of like a Wright study. And then afterwards, we'll have a slightly slower loop where we're pulling together learnings and adjustments that might take more than 15 minutes to go modify. So this is a calendar that is about kind of optimizing loop length. Now, I stress that this customer feedback chunks, they need to be non-negotiable. And this happened with one of my teams. I was like, hey, we did a kick-ass, it was a totally new team, so they didn't know what my expectations were yet. But like on the Tuesday, they had a totally great customer cycle, learned a lot, started fixing all these things, coded all through Wednesday. And toward the end of Wednesday, they're like, Tom, like, I know we have a customer cycle tomorrow, or like one is scheduled for Thursday, but if we could just plow through and design and develop on Thursday, we could have an amazing one on Friday. And I said, well, there's a lot of things in life where if you're 95% committed, the world is really hard. And when you're 100% committed, the world becomes really easy. Because right now there's 5% of you that's saying the thing will not be ready for Thursday, and it's asking me right now to go push this to Friday. And trust me, if you allow that 5% to live, we'll get to Friday morning sometimes, and you'll want to push it to Friday afternoon. And we'll get to Friday afternoon, and you'll want to push it to next week. If you're 100% committed, it looks more like this. Hey, it's actually not a special thing that we're getting customer feedback. So the fact that it's not all done is fine. The stuff that is done, that's what we're testing. It's a way simpler way to live life. If you're 100% committed to serving your customer and being around them and caring about them, then this is incredibly easier than all the debates and fears and ego drama around releases when you're only 95% committed to your customer. So non-negotiable customer feedback cycles. Now, these are all very abstract looking. What might it look like in practice? So a number of you guys are staying at the Zeta Hotel, which is actually right next to where we do a lot of this customer testing, at least for business to consumer stuff. The place where we do customer testing is we go to the mall. And why in the world would you go to the mall? Well, what's great about the mall is no matter what your B2C product is, there is a store in the mall that already filters for that demographic. So if you want women over 35, you go to Ann Taylor. If you want teenagers, you go to Hot Topic, whatever. It's like, you're not going to go find a 50-year-old in Hot Topic. It's just not what's going to happen. So it's like the mall has already done your demographic segmentation and recruiting. Right? You can just go to where they are. The secret, of course, too, is you're mostly going to think that you're bothering them, but a lot of people that are in the mall are actually kind of bored because they're like, what are you up to? I'm bored. Let's go to the mall. So they're actually not that offended if you go and try to talk to them. Though there is a little bit of a secret. If you approach with an away team of 2 guys, you get a 40% people will talk to you rate. Guy and a girl is 55, almost 60. 2 girls is north of 70. So if you're an entrepreneurial team, it helps to have female entrepreneurs for many reasons, not just for that one. Now, what do we do when this happens? Well, there'll be an away team that will be over at Hot Topic or whatever demographically filtered areas that we want to use. And then there'll be a home team that's in the food court or some other place where we won't get kicked out. And what happens, because sometimes you get kicked out, but what happens is while the away team is talking with these customers, they either have the development team on speakerphone, or right after a 5-10 minute customer interaction, they'll pull aside and it's like, okay, so they got to the second screen, they're really confused about these 2 buttons. I don't think they're actually necessary until later in the thing. And they didn't notice this, so we need to let's try to move that more in the center so it's a little bit more obvious. Got it? Okay, cool. And then they keep testing. And then about 15, 20 minutes later, your phone buzzes and they're like, refresh. And then when you refresh, the changes are in. And that's what a loop length of 15 minutes looks like. So fast changes are, you can do 5 in an hour. It's totally plausible. We do this all the time at the mall. Now, of course, those are not substantive, deep, coding changes. These are things where it's just a basic usability problem. Oh, this text didn't make any sense to people. This button was in the wrong place. These things you can easily change in 10 or 15 minutes, and you'll get a bunch of these fast changes done within the day. At the end of the day, there might be some slower changes where it might take you half a day of code or whatever, or half a day of design in order to go deeper. And I call them medium changes, and we do them right after we get back from the mall for the following Wednesday. And then the slow changes are things that are more substantive. They're things that kind of they're deeply structurally wrong with what you've done, or they're deeply challenging the premise of what you're trying to create. Now, how do you even know what you're trying to create? Well, we look for these things that are called eyes light up moments. And eyes light up moments are people, this is not you talking about the product, these are people just doing the thing. Oh, this is a nod to John Coco too, situational ethnography, this is what we're doing. That's what he said to go do. That's what it looks like. So, so people will be having this experience on the mobile, or they'll be having this experience on the laptop, and you're not telling them to get excited about, they're just doing it. And then all of a sudden there's a moment wow, does this do this? And yeah, totally. And like that's an eyes light up moment. It's like really difficult for people to fake, and people don't just randomly fake eyes light up moments. It like would just be bizarre. But when you see that, you know that you've got something in your product which really stands out and matters to people, right? Because most of the time you're thinking about why the product matters to you. I mean, you believe that you're thinking about your customers, but most of the time you're thinking about your own concerns. It's like, oh, is this dev manager going to allow this to go through? How am I going to communicate this to my SVP? It's like, that's definitely not about your customer. So in these moments, in these eyes lights up moments, this is like a beautiful moment which is really, truly about your customer. Like you've done something in their life that matters enough that they'll have that response. And when you have like these eyes light up moments, we also call them magic moments, then this is actually what your product is about. All the things that you think your product is, oh, it's this search box and this login flow and this like set of user records and this way that we serve ads and whatever, is not what your product is. Your product is this kind of magic moment, and like a lot of your task then is to get out of the way of that magic moment or only add features that amplify and improve that magic moment. Now, a lot of you may be thinking, like, how could you possibly do so many changes so quickly, like 150 hardware prototypes in 10 weeks, or doing so many software changes in an hour or a day? Sounds freaking crazy. And this is a really important concept, not just for you, but all your engineers as well. Now, a thing, just like we don't examine the culture of right and wrong versus the culture of learning, we don't examine the culture of development. And most of the culture of development is about scalability and efficiency. So like, you know, what do you hear all the time? It's like, well, I'm going to write this code, but got to make sure it's scalable. Going to do this, but got to make sure it's scalable. But scalability is already a decision, right? And just like people can go design for efficiency or scalability, engineers can also design for adaptability. Now, when you design for efficiency or scalability, what you're actually saying is you're designing against adaptability. Because what efficiency means is, what's the least number of things I can put in there so it does exactly this? That's what something efficient does. Now, if it's not going to go do that, you need to break a lot of things to make it go do something else because it's been made very efficient at doing blank. So start out any new process with a design for adaptability and have the engineers know that actually most of this code base is getting thrown away because the fundamental architecture that you build around a design for adaptability is very different than a fundamental architecture around scalability or efficiency. But by having a design for adaptability, you're able to go answer the critical question of what should we do? And then by doing your later design for scalability, you can say, well, this is how we're going to do it big. Right? That's fine. So by separating those two, you can get much further with these sorts of processes. And a lot of the heartache of innovation comes from mixing up which stage that you're in here. All right. And just to close this out, wrapping up the last couple slides. So your product, you think your product is all these screens and flows and whatever. Really, your product is just this magic moment. Like it's the thing that like people will talk about. People don't talk, so the magic moment in Uber, for example, is you press this thing and a car shows up out of nowhere and you're like, whoa. And then like afterwards, like, you know, you leave the thing without paying. They actually have two magic moments. That's why they're worth $50 billion. And you guys are worth whatever. So if you have two, even better, right? But usually you only get one to start. But when you have those magic moments, now the magic moment of Uber is not, well, what was the login flow like? What was the payment flow like? What was the whatever flow like? It's like, whatever. I don't even remember what those screens were. Right? I just remember when I got out of the cab, I was like, oh, that was nuts. Now, the magic moment, too, is actually very small. It's oftentimes only like 5, 10, 15 seconds long. And what you want to do is, like, when you identify that moment, you want to, like, take away all these features in dark gray that are detracting from this moment. And you want to accentuate some of these features in green that would amplify this moment. And you want to get rid of all usability issues no matter what, because imagine having difficult usability on something that detracts from the magic moment in the first place. That's horrible. Like, not only is it hard to use, it's hard to use to finish something that makes the thing terrible in the first place. So the fast cycles, the short and medium revisions, are really about like tweaking, fixing usability issues, and like get those little lightning bolts out of there. Like you know, and this is what I would add to kind of Kathy's talk, where it's like, remove the friction from that sort of stuff, because this is unnecessary difficulty, right? Like, you know, that stuff you should make effortless. But there's going to be, in your magic moment, Your magic moment may include necessary difficulty, which is great, right? And that's kind of her point. There's like, at the core of it, your magic moment, in order for it to be challenging, exciting, or what have you, that may have necessary, exciting, engaging difficulty in it, as opposed to accidental, unnecessary, terrible difficulty. And the other thing to go think about is, your product is not the world, the product gets used in the world. So the world will come in and throw the big lightning bolt, and it'll be like, oh, you're not going to complete this flow because your wife needs this now. And you're like, oh, crap. Or like, you're not going to complete this flow because you got to your bus stop and you need to put this thing away, right? So both the solving of the larger contextual problems as well as the honing of the magic moments, these are the things that you explore via the medium to longer term cycles and revisions. So just to close on the concept very quickly, the idea of working on your loop length, you're going to be thinking about how long it takes you to go from a new conjecture or observation to a new actual observed result from customers. You're going to make lots of different loop lengths that allow you to do fast, medium, and slow alterations. And then you're going to apply those, the short and medium ones to nail usability issues like super fast instead of letting them linger for months. And you're going to use the longer cycles in order to go deep into discovering your magic moments as well as making the thing work in the context and the purpose of the world itself. So with that, thank you.